All right, the last topic we're going to talk about is, yes, we want all, Katie barred the door. We want all kids to be expelled from the fellowship right now. So anyone under 18, this is X-rated. You don't want to be here. You don't want to hear this. Anyone weak of heart, no, I'm kidding about the doors. The door stuff. It's just a very sensitive subject, and I feel like we are now in this last class going to deal with the 800-pound gorilla in the middle of the living room, which for some of you guys is actually an 800-pound gorilla. See, that was funny.
Stop talking about me, Mike.
I get, when I'm talking about something I'm uncomfortable with, I resort to two things, statistics and humor. Yeah. So in this last class, you're going to hear plenty of both. Because it's a hard topic, but we have to deal with it, and it's fun. So let's start out with something we should truly believe about sex and marriage, because the Bible tells us so. And it's inarguable if you look at the Bible. Sex, in the context of marriage, is extremely important. Newsflash, extremely important. In fact, it's honored. In fact, it's exalted. Hebrews 13:4 says that marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. That's talking about sex, and it's talking about a special realm of our marriages that is to be kept pure and holy. Sex in marriage serves a purpose, not the one you're probably thinking of. It's to bring us to a special level of intimacy that can't be reproduced in any other way with any other kind of person at all. It's God's gift to us to bring you and your spouse into this level of intimacy that cannot be achieved in any other relationship. Different from your best friend, different from your colleagues, your co-workers. This is a special thing that only you and your spouse enjoy. In fact, the whole book of Song of Solomon, you ever read people try to, like Bible commentators try to make Song of Solomon not to be about sex? And they say, no, it's clearly it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for God's love for the church or for the Babylonian king's feelings towards his subject. No, it's not. No, it's not. Just read it. It's about sex, okay? It's about our sexual relationship with spouse. I was reading this book about biblical translation once. You ever read Song of Solomon and you get to the scripture where he says, my sister, my bride, and inside your head you went, ew. You ever do that? Yeah, that's what the first time you read that, you're like, he calls her his sister? Like, gross. But it's because there's no comparable word in English. I read this translation thing that said we don't have a word that's the closest we could come to translating it with sister. But it's really a special word that means it's more like the thing we could come closer to is soulmate. That term is to reflect a special relationship that you have with nobody else, like a soulmate. For this reason, because sex is so special and it's supposed to bring us to this particular unique level of intimacy, when Mary works with teenage female patients, she takes great pains to explain to them that it's not about sex. Sex isn't just sex. It's emotional and it's spiritual. It's not just a physical thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's not just a physical thing. She carefully explains this to her teenage girl patients. It's supposed to be what makes the marital relationship different from any other relationship, which is why, again, there are so many scriptures against sexual immorality. To keep this unique, special function of this unique, special relationship pure. And that's why Paul says, if you remember 1 Corinthians 6, Paul said, don't unite yourself with a prostitute because when you have sex, you become one flesh. He's saying if you do this casually and you have sex outside of marriage, you're still becoming one flesh with that person. It's not meant for that person. It's meant for you to do with your spouse. So this is a holy thing, a special thing, a unique thing that's meant to serve a function to bring your relationship to a level of intimacy that no one else can share in. Nobody else can share in. No one else can have. Mary?
So let's go back and look at Genesis 2 that Michael just referred to a little bit. Let's start in the end of verse 20. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib that he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." You know, this whole one flesh concept, I mean, obviously we're talking about a sexual relationship between a husband and a wife, but it goes so far beyond that. I think about the one flesh means whatever happens to Michael happens to me, right? If Michael loses his job, that's a problem for me too, right? If Michael gets cancer, I've got cancer to deal with in my life. So it's talking about the physical relationship, but that physical relationship between the husband and the wife puts them on such a different plane. Like Michael was saying, it's different from you and your best friend. All right, what happens to your spouse happens to you, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this class. Let's look at another scripture in 1 Corinthians 7, starting in verse 1. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. Too late, brothers, sorry, that's over. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. So do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourself to prayer. Then come together again, so Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. This scripture sets up an expectation that our sexual relationship with our spouse is going to be an ongoing, regular, positive part of our marriage. It's designed to keep each partner in the relationship from sin, from sexual immorality, to protect them. It's also designed to improve our intimacy with our spouse, improve our connection to our spouse, to deepen that relationship. The word duty that's translated duty there is actually two Greek words that is better translated the good or kindness that is owed, So it's not a chore, all right, that we have to do, but it's a kindness, a good that we owe each other in our marriages. Let me give you some of the medical benefits of having sex, all right? Blood pressure reactivity distress is better for people who have recently had intercourse. Duh, all right? So, if you have more sex, you might not kill one of your children, all right? Might take the stress level down a little bit, all right? Some studies show a reduced risk for some types of cancer in women. Several studies have shown that sexual intercourse correlates with a greater satisfaction with life in general, satisfaction with the relationship, and improved mental health. So it is actually good for us, all right? That's what these things are telling you. That's what some of these studies are telling you. It's good for us. It's good for us physically. It's good for us emotionally. It's good for the relationship as a whole. Looking back at that scripture in 1 Corinthians, one of the things that strikes me is the equality of it for each spouse, right? That the wife's body belongs to the husband's body belongs to the wife. So each partner in the relationship has the same responsibilities and they have the same rights. It doesn't say that our bodies don't belong to us. They obviously do belong to us, but there's some authority that our spouse has over our bodies as well. again, in the Greek, that word translated authority kind of carries with it this concept of stewardship, of being a steward. If you think about, I'm a big Downton Abbey fan. I don't know if any of you watch Downton Abbey, but the head butler, or whoever he is, he doesn't own the place, right? He doesn't own it, all right? The other guy owns it, Lord, whatever he is. Now, obviously, I got all the names down perfectly. But the head steward of that house would never do anything that was detrimental to the owner of that house, ever do anything that was detrimental. Everything he did was to protect that house that he's a steward of and to benefit the owner of that mansion, right? That's what it means to be a steward. I mean, I think that's a pretty good portrayal of being a steward. In the same way, if we view ourselves as the stewards of our spouse's sexual lives, we're going to do things to protect that. We're going to do what's good for them in that. If each partner is thinking about sex in this way, it works beautifully. If I'm thinking about benefiting Michael and Michael is thinking about benefiting me, we've got no trouble when it comes to sexuality. Nobody's controlling the relationship with their own desires or needs. Nobody is controlling it with their own limits. All right, we're thinking about how to benefit each other with that.
It may seem odd to you, if you're like me, that we could mention Downton Abbey and sex in the same, because I don't know, I'm just saying. I consider Downton Abbey what we psychologists call a soporific, something that's useful for sleep, perpetuating sleep. Now, that all having been said, let's talk about some statistics. Now, in the past, if you've been at marriage retreats for years, in the past, you had the only thing that was used to gauge your success in a marriage was sexual frequency. That was like the goal. That was like the metric. If you were having sex this frequently, you made the cut and you have a good marriage, right? That's not the way it. So if you're not having sex all the time, you have a bad marriage. And the challenge would be to increase your frequency, and then they'd say, "Good night. That's it. Go up to your hotel room." So it was all implicit and done. That's the way it used to be in marriage retreats. And I always hated that because frequency for its own sake is a mistake. This isn't a competition. This isn't we're not polling numbers, Frequency for its own sake is a mistake. However, frequency is related to desire, which is what fuels sexual relationships. So if you desire your spouse, there is going to be some frequency. Whether it's low or high, that's up to you. But it's got to be there at some rate, some frequency. So in preparing for this talk, I looked at some research that found out that sexual problems in the world really seem to have to do with what constitutes differences between you and your spouse and what is good sex, differences in expectations. So I just want to share some statistics with you to show you that what's considered normal in the world, what's considered normal between couples in the world. Here's what I found out. In the world, 1 in 5 married couples, 1 in 5, has a non-sexual marriage, which is defined as less than 10 sexual encounters a year. Now, some of you are saying, got in the 10th last night. So, okay, I dodged that bullet. Missed that by 1. So hey, great, That's 1 in 5 married couples, 10 or fewer sexual encounters a year. Here's another statistic they found out. The initial romantic love phase, that romantic love phase, the high sexual frequency phase when you first got married, usually that lasts less than 2 years, and in most cases, often less than 6 months. So if you're a newlywed, enjoy it, because evidently it's not going to last, okay? I'm just saying, that's what the statistics say. Here's another statistic. The average frequency, we're talking about average frequency of intercourse is from 4 to 5 times a week to once every 2 weeks. However, Thank goodness there's some stratification by age here. For couples in their 20s, the average is 2 to 3 times a week. For couples in their 50s, it's 1 to 2 times a week. For couples who are older, it depends on how much access we have to Geritol and coffee. That's just the thing. That's what it's dependent on. So why am I telling you this? Why am I turning back on what I just said about statistics and not using statistics as a metric of how good your marriage is? Because I just want you to know there's still no standard, okay? There's no standard metric for perfect frequency. However, you have to know this. Sexual desire is facilitated by a rhythm of some kind of regular sexual activity. So in other words, this is what happens. If sex is infrequent, if it's infrequent, like less than twice a month, let's say, what happens is expectations build, and then you get crippled by anticipatory anxiety or avoidance because, you're building it up. If you're not doing it frequently enough, when the time comes, it becomes this big, giant, momentous thing, like a performance evaluation at work, It's like, oh, it's coming. Here comes my performance evaluation, which happens once a quarter. And then you cripple yourself worrying about it. You see what I'm saying? That's what we don't want to happen. If you're doing it frequently enough, then one of you can say no, and it's not a catastrophe. You see what I mean? Or it might not go the way you planned, but because you're doing it frequently enough, it doesn't have to be a guilt thing. You see what I'm saying? So frequency, some level of frequency is important because it gets you off the hook for all the other times, is what I'm saying. So let me give you some more statistics. Let me just tell you some more statistics. In the world, get this, 35 to 40% of experiences, 35 to 40% of sexual experiences, married couples I'm talking about, are rated as very good for both people. 35 to 40%. Minority of the time, okay? 20% are good for only one. Who could that be? I'll give you 2 guesses where you're only going to need one. Who's the one that usually says it's good no matter what? Yes, thank you, husbands, for backing me up on that. So 20% are usually very good for one and only okay for the other. That's 20% of experiences. 15 to 20% are okay for one and acceptable for the other. I'm not exactly sure what constitutes acceptable sex, but I can guarantee you we've been there at some point in 34 years. I don't know. And 5 to 15% are dissatisfying or dysfunctional, which means you quit trying. That's what dissatisfying or dysfunctional means. It's like you give up completely, okay? So once again, why would I burden you with these statistics? Because on one hand, I want you to have realistic expectations. All I'm telling you is not every time has to be a mountaintop experience. It can be an anthill experience or a molehill experience, You can even have an occasional mediocre experience. In doing so, you're within the majority of people in the United States. I'm just telling you this so you don't feel guilty or uptight or weird, okay? You can have this occasional mediocre experience as long as you accept it without guilt or blame, And men, I know your pride. It's like, we won't go there because you know what I'm talking about. So, you can be okay if it's not a mountaintop experience. Now, on the other hand, now let's talk about us as Christians. Because things are different. As Christians, we don't have to accept these statistics, which are the mediocre numbers of the world. We can raise the bar. Listen to this statistic. According to the National Institute of Health, the level of emotional and physical satisfaction with sex is highest for people who attend church regularly. That ought to boost church attendance on Sunday. All of a sudden you're like, no, we don't miss this anymore. Oh, midweek? Fine. Can we have another midweek? That's good. And their lowest sexual satisfaction is lowest for unmarried people with no religious affiliations. Now, think about this. How is sex portrayed in the media? In the media, it's portrayed as best when you're single and have no church affiliation and no obligation. That's how it's portrayed as the best. The fact is, the statistics say it's just the opposite. That's when it's least satisfying. Also, get this statistic. Couples who pray together have more ecstatic sexual experiences. My caveat to that would be, don't pray during the ecstatic sexual experience, okay? God doesn't want to be there, all right? He's got other things to do, okay? But if you pray, and especially if you pray about this, you will have more ecstatic sexual experiences. That's what the statistics say. So the point is this: while not every experience has to be a mountaintop experience, which puts too much pressure and guilt on you, give yourself a break for the occasional missed opportunity and the occasional, we're going to make up for this by having popcorn or something like that. But what we're learning is God rewards Christians with a better sex life. That's what the statistics say. God rewards your discipleship with a better sex life. And we don't have to accept the low standards of the world.
Think back to the scriptures in Genesis 2. It's really cool to think about, the two things that survived from the Garden of Eden, two things that we still have are marriage, right? That was instituted in the garden, and the sexual relationship between a husband and wife. That's kind of cool, right? Nothing else from the Garden of Eden survived, all right? Immortality, but anyway. Nothing else survived from the Garden of Eden. That's what we have left of God's perfect world. That's kind of cool. But if you go to Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve sinned, what is the first area that Satan attacked them in? Their sexuality, right? They start doing leaves together to cover the special parts, right? Okay. They were embarrassed of their bodies. The first thing Satan did is attack them sexually. That's the first thing he did. Still doing it with us today. So let me talk about some of the ways that Satan uses to destroy this gift that God has given us in our marriages. The first is our past. If you were really blessed, you grew up in a home that was loving and supportive and gave you a very healthy spiritual view of sexuality. If you were really blessed, most of us were not that blessed, right? That's not the way we grew up. At the worst extreme, some of us may have experienced some form of abuse growing up as children. The current research estimates that 1 in 3 women and 1 in between 4 and 7 men were sexually abused as children. All right? So a lot of us are bringing some very painful, traumatic experiences and memories into marriage. All right? Satan gets kids very early on in this area of sexuality through abuse and a lot of other ways. Just take the abuse one for right now. If you are in a marriage where one spouse has been affected by abuse, again, going back to this one flesh scripture, you've got to see it. It's not his problem or her problem. It's our problem. All right? This is our problem, what happened to you. And we've got to work on it together. It is very difficult to work through all the ramifications of being abused as a child. Very difficult. I've sat in rooms with people doing it. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of work. But it can be done. Step 1 is admitting that it happened. And step 2 is talking to your spouse about it and saying, we've got to work on this together. This is us, all right? It has affected us as a couple. And so it's both of our problem. It's not just my problem. It's both of our problem. Get professional help if you need to, all right? If you need to, go to therapy and work it out. But don't let Satan take what happened to you when you were growing up and steal this gift that God is trying to give you in your marriage. you know, maybe your past wasn't abusive. Maybe it was growing up in a home where sexuality was just repressed and not talked about at all. You know, Michael talked about my dad. You know, my dad was a very conservative, stoic World War II vet, and he had 3 daughters. And I remember him one time saying, "Sex is how God made you. It's not what you do." That was pretty much the training I got in sexuality growing up. You know, so the unspoken message was, don't do it, ever, you know. Then to help matters along, I went to 12 years of Catholic schools with nuns, you know. That wasn't a really healthy place to learn about sexuality either, you know. So when Michael and I got married, this was a big problem for me. I mean, I had been trained, sex is bad, don't do it, period. That's pretty much what I had been trained with, all right? No healthy education about sex or anything like that. When we became disciples, I can tell you exactly where we were sitting in the car with a couple that met us and studied the Bible with us. And I remember the brother saying, "Let's talk about your sex life." And I thought, I want to jump out of the moving car right now. You know, that was the last thing I wanted to talk about. But I had to come to the conviction that I didn't want my husband, who was trying to be a disciple, a Christian, I didn't want him missing out on anything. And that this was my problem that I had to deal with, that I was going to have to go to work on how I thought about sexuality and what I did about it. And I'll tell you the time that I knew I was making some progress. We went to our Bible talk, and it was around Thanksgiving time, and you guys have been in these Bible talks, right? Everybody, we're going to pray about what we were thankful for this year, all right? So we're all praying about, you know, we're thankful that the kid did better in school, and we're thankful that God did this for me. And we get to Michael, everybody's heads bowed, and he's saying, "God, thank you so much for the sisters that have been helping my wife, and God, thank you so much for Victoria's Secret." I was ready to crawl under a chair, but I knew I was making a little bit of progress, all right? That's the point I'm trying to make. I knew, so, you know, if you've got that, go to work on it, all right? Go to work on it. This is a gift that God has given you and your spouse together, and you may have to go to work on it. You know, Michael mentioned what we call Hollywood sex. You know, if Satan hasn't attacked you any other way, he has attacked you this way, because he attacks our whole culture this way. It's part of our culture. You know, you go to the movies or you turn on TV, and sex is used to, you know, it's used to sell stuff. It's used to exploit people. It's used violently a lot of times, all right? You know, Satan loves this, and we think this is normal, all right? This is normal. This is not normal. You know, at the very best, you know, sex is portrayed as between two 20-year-old people. Sometimes, most of the time, they barely know each other, right? You know, and they look like their bodies have been airbrushed, and most of the time they have been airbrushed, by the way, you know. And we think that's what good sex looks like. That's what sexuality is supposed to be like. No, it's not. No, it's not. You know, but Satan puts these thoughts in our head that if I don't look like the woman on the screen, I don't feel comfortable, right, with myself, you know. We've got to attack this culture of sexuality that we've been handed down that makes us think very negatively about this gift that God has given us.
No, I was smirking because I was thinking about Mary's dad, my father-in-law. You know how Mary said one of the things he said about sex was, "It's bad and don't do it." The other thing he once said about sex was, "Don't marry someone ugly because your babies will look like monkeys." That was the extent of her, yes. So thank you to my father-in-law. He was a man of profound wisdom and very few words. And like I said, when he had those words, didn't he also say, people's teeth are so wide you could eat an apple through a picket fence? Oh, yeah. Yes, that's his commentary on orthodonture. So, yeah, okay. He said many wise things, but not so wise things too. So Mary said that one thing that can adversely affect our sexual relationships, our own past. The other thing is our own undealt with sins, again. The most damaging of which, once again, is sexual immorality or impurity. So, back to Hebrews 13:4. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. So here we are, we have this marriage bed. Beautiful white linens, pillows and flowers on it and everything. You know what? The internet and social media has brought us a sewer pipe that potentially dumps all kind of raw sewage onto that bed. We are living in an age of unprecedented sexual immorality because of the internet. Now, I'm a technophile. I love technology. However, like anything else, it can be used for ill or good. I went to a workshop the other day, last week, in which I heard some terrible statistics. One is that premarital sex, sexual experimentation amongst school-age kids, intercourse amongst school-age kids is going down, is becoming less frequent. However, incidents of oral sex and anal sex are going up. Why? Because kids have learned that you don't want to have intercourse because it'll make you pregnant, but look what we found on pornography. Look at all the other things you can do and not get pregnant. So these other forms of sex have expanded exponentially, have become more frequent among kids. Pornography. It's being shown that men's sexual activity is being delayed because they have access, their interpersonal sexual activity is being delayed because they have access to pornography. What do they need someone else for? You see what I'm saying? So that's what's happening. These are some of the statistics. Pornography is not a victimless crime. A lot of people indulge in pornography because they think it doesn't really hurt anybody. It hurts everybody. It hurts you, and it hurts your spouse, and it hurts those who were exploited to make it. It is not a victimless crime. We've seen pornography bring down entire churches. Many, many years ago, we were called in when this kind of thing was just becoming evident. We were called in to help a church where the pornography thing through one guy in particular had gone through the whole church and almost brought it down. We can't explain, we can't overstate the detrimental effects of impurity, pornography that you can get over the internet. So we want you to keep your marriage bed pure from this sin. If you have trouble with pornography, get help. Get help. There are more and more, God bless, there are more and more churches dealing with this kind of addiction as a group. So they have these groups, purity groups, where men hold each other accountable. They use electronic things to monitor what you're looking at. If you need that kind of help, a lot of these groups run on a kind of an AA model. You have a partner that you call when you feel like you're going to indulge, So that's the standards of the world, using techniques like that. We can at least do that much. So once again, I can't understate the detrimental effects of that particular sin.
Okay, let's talk about some other things that Satan might use to ruin your sex lives. How about unresolved resentments and bitterness? I think this is more an issue for women than men. Your husband may have resentments against you, but when he's feeling frisky, it's still gonna happen. All right? Yeah. They're built that way. For women, we're not built that way. All right? If there is a disturbance in the force, all right, it's not gonna happen. It is not gonna happen. Are you letting a lack of forgiveness, a lack of dealing with your own resentments and bitterness towards your husband ruin your sex life in your marriage? I used to give an assignment when I saw sisters in my office, and after we'd been together a few times, and they started telling me all years of things that their husband had done that hurt them and that they were resentful about, years of it. And so I gave what I thought was an unbiblical assignment in a way, but it seemed to be very helpful. I told them, you buy a notebook, and every time you think about one of these record of wrongs that you obviously have anyway, write it down. Write it down. Write down your record of wrongs. I want it in written form. And then we would go through in the sessions, And we would talk about those things, and sometimes it would be, he's apologized for that. I know he really didn't mean it. We've talked about that. And I would say, fine, cross that off your list. That's no longer on your record of wrongs, The things that we couldn't cross off the list, I would have them go back and talk with their husbands about until they came to some kind of resolution. We had to get rid of that record of wrongs, though, right? I mean, that was disrupting their marriage in every way. All I'm saying is, if you've got that record of wrongs, if you're carrying that around in your head, get to work on it, okay? That bitterness and resentment is your sin, not his sin, all right? He may have sinned against you in some way, but the resentment is your sin, so you've got to get to work on it because it will affect your sexual life. Just plain old selfishness affects our sex lives, We are just too tired, or we are just too busy, or we are just too whatever, you fill in the blank, right? We're just too selfish is what it is, all right? We are too selfish to give to our spouse in this area. If Satan can't use anything else, he's going to use some form of daily life to mess up your sex life. How many people have new babies in the house? Anybody? New babies? Couple, all right? I mean, you can't even get your teeth brushed, right? Okay? So you're going to have to rethink your sexual life, right? Here's one that's worse. How many people have a house full of teenagers? Okay. They actually know what you're doing when you go and close the bedroom door. That's even worse. You're going to have to re-engineer your sexual relationship with your spouse around those teenagers that actually know what you're doing. Aging, Michael made a reference, aging changes things. Health problems changes things. Medication can mess things up. You know what I'm saying? Life stuff can, job schedules. One of you works in the day and one of you works at night. You got to rethink it. You got to figure out what's going to work for you. Once one of those things come up in life, and they come up over and over again, depending on what part of your life it's in, you've got to consider that this is our new normal now. We got a new baby in the house. This is our new normal. We've got to figure out how we can have time with each other and still give to each other sexually with a new baby in the house, or with a house full of teenagers, or with the job schedule where one person is working night shift. We got to rethink it and get creative. All I'm just saying is we can't let those things keep us from having this very important part in our marriage.
Before I go any further, I'm feeling really guilty about making fun of my father-in-law. I'm just going to confess that and apologize. Let me say this one thing about my father-in-law. They had 3 girls. All the fun we're making of them, they raised 3 girls who have only been married once to each of their husbands, and each of the 3 girls married decent guys, found very decent men. I'm going to throw myself in there. So my in-laws, I'm sorry if I didn't mean to make fun of them, because they did a lot of things right that were very admirable. So sorry. Okay. I just didn't want to be struck down by lightning. Now, let's talk about the fun stuff. Here's the moral of the story. You have to deal with your sex life as a team. It's a team thing, if you haven't noticed. It's not my performance, it's not your performance, it's not a performance thing, all right, like NASCAR, all right, or the Olympics. It's a team thing. With that in mind, let's talk about some things that can facilitate a good and happy and healthy sex life. One of them, Mary just mentioned, is time together. And I mean time together. Which, as she said, you might have to engineer. Now, I'll confess that as we were trying to work that out, our youngest kid once, can I say that? Once, interfered, walked in and, that's right. She came in with half the campus was with her. That's right. And I remember now, we were in the living room, right. Okay. So, to this day, she says, she was like, Dad, I can't unsee that, okay? That is now burned into my memory for the rest of my life, Probably didn't help that we were doing a little role playing and I was wearing my cop suit and she was in the Little Red Riding Hood outfit. I'm just saying. So I don't know. That might have had something to do with it. But hey, here's the thing. If it's uncomfortable to talk about with now your kids don't need to know every detail about your sex life, especially when you're younger. But they do need to, it's got to be a not weird thing to talk about at home, okay? Or else it's always going to be weird to talk about. So they just tease us about that now. Now, this regular time together thing, no job, no work-related stuff, no TV, the TV goes off, no kids. You have to make that happen because it's the lifeblood of a marriage. You have to arrange it. It can't be spontaneous. Sometimes you can be spontaneous, but how often does everything just fall into place where the kids are gone, you're not too tired, and that rarely happens. So let's be real. You have to make it happen. You have to arrange it. Sometimes, yes, it has to be scheduled, okay? And you're like, well, that's unromantic, and okay, it's life, all right? Now, the advantage is if you schedule it, you have time to mentally prepare for it. Now, in my opinion, feeling sorry for my wife, having to have sex with me, I like her to have plenty of time to sedate herself with wine or something else. She's got to get mentally prepared for this thing that's going to happen, So I like to give her plenty of warning. A little Xanax if she needs it. No, I'm just kidding about that. Now, in an effort, and this is even more so as we get older and busier and more things are interfering. So sometimes it has to be scheduled. However, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. In an effort to make it even a little spontaneous, I've come up with a system. Now I'm going to divert here for a few minutes, and you're going to wonder why he's talking about this. It will become evident in a few minutes. I want to talk about two things. First is my love of Star Trek, okay? When I say love of Star Trek, how much time you got? Now don't come up to me and say, oh, I'm a Trekkie too. No, you're not. No, you're not. Any 30-year-old that lives in the basement of his mother's home and has a pair of rubber Spock ears can be a Trekkie. My commitment to Star Trek way surpasses this. You think you know something? My knowledge of Star Trek is encyclopedic and unfailing. It is in my DNA in a way that it's hard to explain. And were I not a Christian, I'd probably be worshiping it. And if you looked in my study at home, you'd probably say, I already do worship it. Between the idols and the pictures and I'm just saying, it's extremely important to me. So that's one thing. Let me talk about an unrelated subject. You know what semaphore is? Semaphore is a system, that's right, I believe the Royal Navy back in the 1400s came up with a system to communicate. It's a two-flag system. So one ship would signal another ship by having these flags, and the position you held the flags were letters so you could communicate, okay? Go back to my Star Trek love. I happen to have a pair of Star Trek pajamas. It's a uniform. It's a uniform, okay? Original series Star Trek uniform. I revere my Star Trek jammies, okay? If it were up to me, and if it were socially acceptable, I would wear them all the time. If you have trouble envisioning them, I think there's the picture. There it is. It's moving. It's moving to see that picture. There I am in front of my model of the Enterprise. Those are my Star Trek jammies. They are a holy thing to me. Okay? I'm going to take that away so you're not distracted. Now, what does any of this have to do with anything? Here's the deal. I know for a fact, my wife, who doesn't love Star Trek with the same passion that I do, or even like it, or even would acknowledge it if she didn't live with me. I know that if I wear my Star Trek jammies, sex is not going to happen. It's a fact of life. It's not going to happen. So if I don't care and it's not on my radar and I have no sexual needs at that moment, I'm breaking out the whole Star Trek jammies. This is her signal that it is off the menu for tonight. And clearly and unequivocally, this is a no-sex night. Wearing the whole Star Trek jammies. Now, if you remember the semaphore system, it involves 2 flags. If I think I might have a chance to get lucky, but I'm not, I'm kind of leaving it up to her, I have a pair of silk jammy pants. I'll wear the Star Trek top, but the silk jammy pants. This is my semaphore system. This is my way of saying, in a spontaneous way, where we're not too mechanical, this is my way of saying, if you're interested, I'm interested. Conversely, if this is a red alert emergency, and it must happen, the Star Trek jammies don't come out of the drawer in any form or fashion. And we go with all silk. Or one of those, tight-fitting. Okay, you don't want to go. Right? All I'm saying is, you do what you got to do. Okay? You do what you got to do. That's our little system to be spontaneous, yet also communicate that our schedules are coinciding at this moment. Okay? That one's for free. So, yes, you're welcome. Yes, you're welcome. So, the answer to everyone's sex problems is go buy Star Trek jammies. That's what I'm saying. So, time alone. Unfettered, uncomplicated time alone. The lifeblood of your sexual life. It's got to be some time alone. The next thing is praying. We mentioned it before. Now, who thinks about praying about their sex life? Well, you should. There were some actual hands that went up. I went, well, that's good. You should. If you pray about your sex life, if there's something wrong with it or you want it to change and you've discussed it with your spouse and you pray about it, do you think God's going to deny you and say, nope, sorry, not happening? God loves sex and marriage. He's going to encourage it. So I urge you to pray about it. Here's another thing that's important. So pray, time alone. This one's really important. Health and fitness. Health and fitness. Some of you have chronic health problems. Yes, I get it. But sexuality is both healthy and a lot related to your physical health. The biggest threats, if you're otherwise healthy, the biggest threats to a good sex life are obesity and cardiovascular disease. Obesity and cardiovascular disease. So if you have either of these things, they must be addressed, especially for men. This is a problem. This is something you need to attend to. Now, if we're talking about exercise, this is the problem. Everyone treats exercise, and we told this to the staff yesterday, you treat exercise like it's an indulgence, or it's a thing that I'll do when I get to it, or it's a if I have time to do it. If you want a good sex life, you better make exercise a life or death priority. If you had diabetes, would you say, well, I'll take my insulin if I have time, or when it's convenient for me, or, oh, well, I forgot today, but I'll take it tomorrow? No, you would see it as life or death. So if you want to be attractive to your spouse and you want to be physically healthy enough for sex, you will take care of these things through regular exercise and a good diet. Now, you can't out-exercise a bad diet. Doesn't matter how much you're exercising. If your diet is bad, it's not going to help. So these are 2 things you really need to focus on. Completely other lecture, though. And lastly, a thing that can help you is to be creative. Be creative. We're talking about different times, different places, different activities, a little variety. I'm going to let you into Now, as long as it's not, no one gets hurt physically, but I'll let you in on a little Shapiro secret on how we've tried to be creative. And I'll try to do this in a clean and savory way. Years ago, earlier in our marriage, we came up with this idea. I don't know who came up with it, but it was a brilliant idea of strip games. So this is what you do. You get a board game or a card game or something like that. What happens is, now it can't be Monopoly, okay? Monopoly, or chess, all right? Those are games that take 4 hours. It's not what I'm talking about here, okay? It's got to be something that you can play repeatedly, and that it's done quickly, okay? For example, Uno, or what's that one with the beads that we play? Pente. So here's the rules. So we came up with this thing. We're going to play this game, a game. When you lose, whoever the loser is has to lose one piece of clothing. Now, there are certain games, because of my intellectual gifts, which are considerable after all, there are certain games that I totally dominate, like Pente, because it's visual and geometric. So I tend to dominate on the visual geometric. She tends to dominate with Scrabble and the more verbal things. What I found, and this is interesting, is, like with Pente, I totally rule, but as she loses every round, I get stupider. So by the time she's lost 3 or 4 rounds of Pente, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I get a little distracted. I'm just saying. And then the whole game gets, So that's just the Shapiro attempt at being creative. I invite you to do the same. Choose your games well, however. What's the other one? Mancala we've used that with, and several other things. Just come look in the drawer in our living room. You'll see them all. So that's being creative. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the creative thing. To help us understand creativity and the variety, I'm going to try to say this metaphorically, wink, as metaphorically as I can, in terms of being creative, trying different activities, wink. I'm going to borrow a metaphor from it. There's a website, a very good website, you should look it up. It's called The Marriage Bed. The Marriage Bed. It's a sex and intimacy website for Christian couples. It's meant to be, So this is what one thing they do is compare the marriage bed to a playground. Think of a playground at a kid's school, okay? What constitutes a playground? There's a fence around it, right? To protect that playground from outside influences, number one. So there are things we don't allow in this playground, which we'll talk about in a minute. No untoward influences are allowed in this playground. Now, in this playground, you have a variety of fun implements. You got a slide, you got a teeter-totter, you got those merry-go-roundy things, you got swings, you got my favorite, those animals that are on really big springs that go into the ground and you go boing, boing, boing. I'm just saying. Those are my personal favorites. So, here's what you do. You got this playground with a bunch of fun things to try. So here's what you do. You try each one at a time, preferably, okay? Now, if you like the boingy thing, but it makes that boingy thing makes the other person nauseous or dizzy, we're not going to do that, okay? If you like the merry-go-round, round and round thing, but that makes the other person sick, we're not going to do it, okay? So that's what I'm saying. You're going to try each thing in the playground. You're going to see how each person likes it. Wink. Now, I don't know in actuality what that translates into. I don't care, and I don't believe God cares as long as no one's getting physically, emotionally hurt, That having been said, those slides and teeter-totters can be metaphors for anything. use your imagination. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to try each one of those things. If someone doesn't like heights or someone doesn't like spinny, you're not going to do that. You're going to say, we're not. But it doesn't mean that at some point we might come back to that in future years or when our health changes and we can tolerate it better. We might just come back to that teeter-totter or boing-boing thing at some point. So you're going to try different things and you're going to find things that both people enjoy in the playground. And our tastes change, over time, changes in health, changes in physical ability, Might be time to stop with the merry-go-round and do something nice in, the sandbox, maybe. Okay, I think I can keep up with the sandbox. All right? So that's how we make sure we're being creative and we have fun. You treat it like a playground. Now, what's outside of the fence? What things can we not let come in the fence? Number one, and write down some scriptures, please. Number one thing you can't allow in your playground: sex outside of marriage. The scriptures are Galatians 5:19 and 1 Corinthians 7, verses 2 and 36. So, sex outside of marriage. And that's not just physical sex, that's pornography, that's emotional affairs. Those things are not allowed in the playground. Number two, adultery. Exodus 20, verse 14. You used to get killed for adultery. Matthew 5:27. So we don't allow adultery. We don't allow, let's just take on this politically volatile issue, we don't allow homosexual activity in the fence. Leviticus 18:22, Romans 1, verses 26 and 27. This next one may blow your mind and you would never think of it, but I got to mention it because the Bible mentions it. Bestiality. Leviticus 18:23. Obviously it was happening, or it wouldn't have had to be dealt with in the Bible. Leviticus 18:22 and Romans 1, 26 and 27. I'm sorry, Leviticus 18:23 and Leviticus 20, verses 15 and 16. Prostitution, soliciting prostitutes. Leviticus 19:29, Corinthians 6, 15 and 16. And incest, Leviticus 18:6. I'm bringing these up because these are severe and serious distortions of what that playground is supposed to be. They're intended to be kept outside of the playground. And like I said, if they weren't happening, the Bible wouldn't have bothered to mention it. And when the Bible does mention them, they are dealt with pretty sternly. Okay? So, just, I didn't write it, but it's out there. Now, we also, out of love for our spouse, we're going to avoid anything, out of respect for the bodies God gave us and respect for our spouse, we're going to avoid anything that might cause our spouse problems. Read Ephesians 5, verses 29 and 33, and 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19. So that means we're never going to compromise about anything we want to do. We're never going to threaten or compromise our spouse's emotional health or physical health or spiritual health. In other words, we're not going to compel our spouse to go against his or her convictions about something. You with me on that? And we're not going to do anything that might hurt him or her medically or physically or mentally or relationally. So if you do have a spouse who has some sexual abuse or trauma in his or her past, you're going to be very respectful of that. You're going to do whatever you have to do to avoid you becoming the same thing in that person's life. Okay? We never push our spouse to compromise his or her beliefs, and we shouldn't be controlled by anything. So if there's something that compels you, that's not right, that's a compulsion, that interferes with your sexual life, we're going to deal with that. Outside of those restrictions, pretty much anything goes, as long as it's by mutual agreement. Okay? As long as it's by mutual agreement. Finally, and I think this is the most important in dealing with your sex life, if you don't have a sense of humor, it's all over. okay? You gotta have a sense of humor. If you treat this too seriously, it's gonna get weird, okay? It's gonna get weird. So you have to have a sense of humor. If you're too uptight about sex, your body's gonna react and shut down and make it more difficult. So have a sense of humor. It's really kind of a funny activity if you think about it in the first place. If you think about it objectively, you know? So that's my last and best piece of advice. So closes our married series, and we really, really appreciate your attention, your time, your applause, and how much you appreciate us. Thank you so much.